Hey, this is Jamey with Stonemeyer Games, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite mechanism in one of my childhood favorite games that I got to revisit recently, a game called Labyrinth. Perhaps you played it, perhaps not. If you have, you probably recognize this map. I've heard that there are different variants. There's like a Spider-Man version, there's an underwater version, there might be other IP versions, intellectual property, but this is the classic version. This is the version I played as a kid, and this is actually the version that I played very recently when I took this photo. The idea in a labyrinth is very simple. You are competitive treasure hunters that start on the corners of this board, and the board itself is a combination of tiles that are glued to the board itself and rows and columns that are loose. And so on your turn, you are taking a loose tile. There's always one loose tile. You are pushing it. See that arrow? You're pushing it into a row or column to push all the tiles in that row or column, and you end up pushing off one tile. And then if you'd like, you can move your piece as far as you want. So it's really just two mechanisms in the game. And the idea is that you're trying to get to 4 treasures to win the game. And the way that I always played it as a kid, I'm not sure if this is an official rule or not, but you had to collect 4 treasures and get back to your starting position. And so it's really just those two mechanisms. You're pushing a tile and you're moving. And I really love both of them. I want to mention both of them, really. The pushing the tile mechanism is really, really cool because it's this really interesting puzzle aspect, because you are physically changing the board for not just for yourself to get to the treasure that you need to, but also to get to other players. And one of the things that you can even do is, if your piece is on a loose tile on the edge here, you can push yourself off and you end up jumping to the other side of the board, the opposite tile on the other side of the board. So it's a way to jump from one side to the other. But I love this type of interaction in the game. You're mainly focused on yourself. You're trying to get your treasures. But in doing so, you are also keeping an eye on the other players and how you might impact them. It feels good to like move another player because they probably didn't expect to be moved on their turn, or maybe they did, maybe they wanted to be moved. So you're constantly looking at, what are other players connected to? How am I changing this surface for myself and all players? But I think my favorite mechanism is the move action, for kind of a weird reason. In most games, like if you think of most dungeon crawl games, your character has a move value. Like you can move 2 spaces, or maybe you're a really fast character, you can move 4 spaces. And so your turn is kind of spent calculating, what can I do with my character's movement and their range, things like that. In Labyrinth, there's no such complication. The only rule is you can move as far as you want, as long as you don't try to cross over a wall. So see where this yellow token is right now? That yellow token, on their turn, they can move it here. They can just move it one space. They can not move it at all. They can move it here to a space that's going to be moved, or they can move it all the way over here to this space. As long as they are connected, they can move. And so it leaves as a really interesting choice still, but it takes out the calculation of having like different stats for each player. It's a great reminder to me that as great as stats are in any game, it makes different characters feel unique and different. But it was a great reminder that level of complexity isn't always needed, and you can still have just as many interesting choices in a game where movement doesn't have a value. You can just move as far as you want as long as some other restriction applies. And it leads to so many other interesting decisions. I mentioned that you could put your piece here, so maybe you can get pushed off, but you might also end up getting pushed in. You can move your piece to a tile that doesn't move, so that just in case that you really don't want someone to move you, maybe you just need like one little connection to get across a gap to get to the piece that you want. There's so many interesting choices in where you decide your piece to land at the end of the turn, especially if you're not connected to your treasure. If you're connected to the treasure that you want, then you just go get it right away, obviously. Or 99% of the time, probably. But if you're not, then you're kind of planning ahead for that next move. How can I position myself so that I can get to that next treasure to the best of my ability? And so I really like that there is no movement restriction other than the walls. Those are my favorite mechanisms in Labyrinth. If you've played this game or any of the variants of it, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, especially if you played a variant, actually. If there are any rules that change the game a little bit, make it feel a little bit different, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that in the comments. Or if this reminds you of any other game, maybe a game where, like this, that your movement is restricted by something other than your own abilities, your own movement value, something like that. Or another game like this where every move, like the pushing the tiles, is changing the landscape for every player on the board, providing some interesting kind of passive player interactions there. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments, and yeah, take care.